Okay, so I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint. Forget how to do that, share screen. Okay, right. Hopefully the reception's better this week. I'm on the island of Guernsey, and the Wi-Fi keeps conking out for the entire island. Nothing I can do about it. We're on 4G, and that's just what it is at the moment. The internet's too fast for it. So today, the 11th of March, we transition from the days of willow into the days of ash. And the ash tree is the 5th tree of the Ogham, and it's the last tree of the first Acma, the first quarter. So it's the conclusion tree of the first group. And it will take us from now into the spring equinox and then beyond. Each tree has 18 degrees of the sun's ecliptic. And so the ash tree runs from the 21st degree of Pisces, the fish, into the 9th degree of Aries, the ram. Now, I haven't got a diagram to show you that, but if you imagine a vertical line, on one side, you've got 9 degrees of Pisces, and on the other side, you've got 9 degrees of Aries. It's a perfect balance between 9 degrees and 9 degrees, making the 18 degrees. Now, the Pisces is a water sign and Aries is a fire sign. So you've got this perfect fire and water balance with the ash tree. It's holding that point, and that point between the 9 degrees of water and the 9 degrees of fire is the spring equinox, the day of perfect balance. So it's all quite beautiful balance and harmony imagery there with the spring equinox. And of course, the spring equinox in many ancient cultures was the beginning of a new year. They weren't following the sun, which would begin at winter solstice, but the beginning of an agricultural year would begin with the first activities of farming and everything, which would be dictated by the spring equinox, and sometimes the next crescent moon or full moon after the spring equinox, so that different cultures did it in different ways. But at spring equinox, the sun rises perfectly due east, and so many ancient sites across the world are aligned with that spring equinox sunrise, and so on. So ash tree is holding that for us. So that balance between water and fire, between Pisces and Aries, is kind of relevant to some of the medicinal understandings, but esoterically, with the internal work, the 3 cauldrons, Pisces is the lower cauldron, and Aries is the head. It governs the head. It's the upper cauldron. So that transition from Pisces into Aries, the spring equinox, is also a massive jump from the feet, which are governed by Pisces, to the head, which is governed by Aries. So this is what's called the salmon's leap, because the alder tree and the willow tree have been at the water's edge, which is the salmon weir. And now for the next 9 degrees of the last 9 degrees of Pisces, the salmon has to jump all the way up to Aries, the head. Quite interesting thing. And then the whole thing descends back down through the body, through Taurus governing the neck and Leo governing the heart, and so on, but there's this leap from the balls of the feet up to the pineal gland, and that's that salmon's leap, loaded with esoteric ideas. But simplistically then, if you look at this diagram, the year divided into 2 halves. At autumn equinox, when the sun enters Libra, we go into the 6 months of darkness, and the daylight hours are shorter than the nights. You know, the nights get longer and longer and longer. And when we go from Pisces into Aries, there's that moment of perfect balance, and then the days are longer than the nights. So you can see the salmon's leap as leaping out of the days of darkness into the days of light, or from the underworld and the feet and the lower cauldron to the upper world and the radiant brow. Taliesin was found in the salmon weir. You know, Taliesin means radiant brow. So they're interesting ideas there. That's number 4. So, as I mentioned just briefly, the bottom left-hand corner here is the first group, the first ACMA, which is your birch tree, rowan tree, alder tree, willow tree, and now the ash tree. All of that's governed by the water's edge, which is the alder tree and the willow tree. So you kind of have, it begins with birch, and then rowan tree takes us to Imbolc. And then after Imbolc, we're at the water's edge with the alder and the willow tree. And that has polarity significance with the cauldron, which is with the triple goddess with Virgo and everything. And then shifting now from the influence of the 9 maidens into the ash tree, and what deity corresponds with the ash tree? Well, there's many, of course. And the Irish word kenning for the ash tree from the Scholar's Primer refers to the spear, you know, and I would say spear of Lugh. You know, Lugh, L-U-G-H, is the young hero who eventually becomes king of the Duatha Dé Danann. But when he first appears, he's not the king. He's just this incredible, brilliant youth who has yet to prove himself, you know. And this character, which I'm going to call Lugh stroke Lugus in Gaul, he'd be known as Lugus and a Celtic Mercury. So Lugus or Lugh, and the main treasure for this part of the wheel would be the spear of Lugh, because ash was the favored wood for making spears, you know. So it fits Lugh perfectly, and it fits Lugh perfectly because ash is the spring equinox, it's the return of the sunlight, and it's facing east, it's the rising of the dawn at the spring equinox due east, you know. So it's got this light, triumphant, after the days of darkness, rising energy. And so any god or goddess that is youthful and full of vitality and all of the almost naive enthusiasm of Aries, you know, Aries is always quick to get things started. It doesn't necessarily see things through, you know. It's brilliantly enthusiastic, that fire sign of Aries, fire in the head and stuff, and that fits Lugh perfectly. The mythologies of Lugh are about triumph over the forces of darkness, and that's the optimism to hold on to with the ash tree. Now, Lugh in Ireland is a young god that comes and helps the Duatha Dé Danann, the pantheon of Irish gods and goddesses, defeat the Fomorians, which is their main chaotic evil enemy sort of thing. But it's light triumphant over darkness. But this is told in other stories too. There's many kind of solar youthful heroes that play this same sort of role. So in the Mabinogion, the Welsh story of how Celwch won Olwen, Celwch is the young, bright, beautiful, shining, charismatic hero that will get King Arthur and all of his entourage to achieve a whole load of impossible tasks. so that Killut can win the hand of Olwen in marriage. Now, Olwen is a flower goddess, you know, so it kind of sings of this radiant young hero eventually winning the May Queen or the flower goddess or the sovereignty goddess. And eventually he'll become king in his own right, like King Arthur first seeing Guinevere before they're married. You know, it's that kind of heroic love, you know, and with Guinevere, her dowry was the round table, you know, so the main motif of King Arthur is his round table of knights. Well, that comes when he marries Guinevere. It's her dowry to him. It's interesting, but it's this young hero achieving the goddess or the muse eventually, after he's been through trials and tribulations and tests and so on, you know. It's also very foolish in the sense, you know, like the fool in the tarot card is a bit of a bimbling idiot. He's still figuring things out. So it kind of has that quality to it. You know, he hasn't become the hero that's achieved everything, but he has all of that potential of achieving everything. So in the Arthurian stories, that fits with Percival seeking the Holy Grail, same sort of ideas. So for me, the deity at the moment for the ash tree fits Lu best, and a whole host of youthful deities that are going to enjoy the rites of May and all of that kind of thing. Now, the symbol of the spear of Lu is one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann, and I reckon that each of the 4 treasures correspond with winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, and autumn equinox. And so spring equinox is this spear of Lu. So the ash tree is the tree for making spears. Also, you know, Odin on Yggdrasil, the world tree, as an ash tree, he was pierced in his side by a spear. You know, so there's an ash tree and a spear again. And even Jesus being crucified around Easter time, again, it's a figure triumphant over darkness, getting speared in the side. So either way, there's this tree and a spear, all fitting this kind of equinox Easter time of year. It's an interesting motif. Now, it's not just Norse mythology that has the ash tree as the sacred world tree. Now, going back to ancient Ireland, there were 5 sacred guardian trees of Ireland. I don't think it was written down until like the 11th century or something, but it dates to a time pre-Christian, so it dates to sort of the 4th century, 5th century, that there were 5 guardian trees. Now, I'm not going to try and pronounce them. I don't know, upset any Irish people, but at the bottom, you'll see 2 that they begin with E-O. I guess that's pronounced E-O, maybe E-O Mugna or E-O Rees. E-O means yew tree. So these 2 bottom guardian trees were yew trees, okay, in the county of Leinster. Now, just above is the county of Meath, and Meath means middle, the centre point, the middle of Ireland, Meath. So you've got the 4 main provinces, and you've got Meath kind of symbolically in the middle. Now, the 3 other trees that were in Meath, so altogether it's 5 guardian trees, but the 3 trees that were in Meath were all ash trees. And really interesting. So of the 5 guardian trees, 2 of them are yew trees, which is winter solstice, and 3 of them are ash trees, which are spring equinox. Now, the importance of the ash trees being in Meath is that Meath represented the centre of Ireland, and it was where all of the high kings of Ireland were coronated. So they were coronated in the area that was sacred to the ash tree, or the ash tree held the center county of Ireland where the High King was coronated. And the whole coronation thing was about the king marrying the goddess of the land, literally. You know, in Meath, she's known as Maeve, spelled M-E-D-B, Maeve. Her name means something to do with mead, you know, the alcohol that's made of honey. So her name kind of means she of the mead, or she who intoxicates, you know, or she tastes as sweet as honey, which is quite interesting if you think one of the epithets of Ogma, who invented the Owen writing system, is he's honey mouthed. So who's he been kissing? Quite funny. But so the ash tree and divine kingship, sacred kingship about the center of the land. So just like Norse mythology, with Yggdrasil being the world tree holding everything together, in the center of Ireland were the three ash trees. Now, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but the three ash trees going kind of horizontal and the two yew trees going vertical looks a lot to me like Orion's belt and his sword. That's just a thought that I'm going to throw out there, but it's very interesting. No trees for Ulster, Connaught, or Munster. It was interesting. So the story of the five guardian trees just relates to Meath and Leinster. But the important thing is that the ash tree is the tree of kingship. And it's Lugh who arrives with the spear of Lugh, who eventually takes over being the king of the Tuatha De Danann. Nuada is the king of the Tuatha, but he's wounded and he's getting on a bit. And when he meets Lugh, he realizes that Lugh would be much better at being king than he would. So he stands down and he lets Lugh take over. So Lugh becomes the new king, this young man. So the whole story of the ash tree is this kind of kingship of the land, or marriage to the goddess of the land. And I would argue in the months ahead, that's played out in the second Acma. It's all about the marriage to the goddess of the land. So the sad thing then, of course, with the ash tree, and we talked about it a little bit before I did my presentation, is that in Saxon mythology and Viking mythology, which I'll just refer to as Norse mythology, the world tree was the ash tree, Yggdrasil, and it connected the lower world to the upper world and all of that stuff. And it's where Odin achieved knowledge of the runes by hanging on the world tree. So it's a tree that gave forth an alphabet. They're not that dissimilar to the Celts having a tree alphabet. The Norse get an alphabet from a tree. It's quite interesting. The tragedy then with the ash tree is a disease that's happened only in the last 20 years or so. It's a disease called ash dieback, and it's quite serious. So I won't dwell on it too long, but it's important, and it's kind of important to the medicine, and there's a kind of strange pattern that's troubling me a little bit. But ash dieback, then, it's a fungal disease, a wind-borne fungus, and it's come from Asia. There's a type of ash tree in Asia that has this fungus, and for the Asian ash tree, it's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. It's a species that's symbiont with it. That's fine. But somehow it was introduced to Eastern Europe, and the first country scholars think that had trouble with ash dieback was Poland. Poland seems to have had ash dieback around about the 1990s, and they didn't know what it was or where it had come from, and gradually it spread from Poland to other Eastern European countries like Lithuania and so on, towards mainland Europe, if you like, or towards Western Europe. It wasn't until it wasn't until 2006, it's quite recent, that they understood the science of it and what was really happening. So it hit Poland in the 1990s, and it took them until 2006 to understand the nature of the beast, if you like. And so it's a fungus that grows on the ash tree and debilitates it and drains its life force away and withers its leaves. And it's windborne. So its spores just get blown on, and it's, you know, you can't stop it. It's just carried in the wind from ash tree to ash tree. And what it does too is it weakens the ash tree so much that other funguses, like the honey fungus mushroom, can also get involved, and then the tree dies. Now, it wasn't until 2012 that the first evidence of ash dieback was found in the British Isles. So it's only, gosh, it's 11 years. It's nothing. 11 years that it's been in the British Isles, and it's already spreading quite prolifically. Terribly bad in Kent, which is the closest bit of Britain to Europe, you know, but the wind is spreading it, and it's spreading far and wide. So having looked at it, various sites on the internet, that the general consensus is that it is killing about 80% of ash trees. The positive angle on that is 20% of ash trees are showing immunity or resilience to it. So the botanists and scientists are looking at the 20% of trees that are surviving and trying to figure out how they can work with that. They don't know yet how to work with it. But the optimism there is that ash won't die out completely. You know, it'd be decimated, but 20% should survive, hopefully. But there's a second problem, which is a kind of beetle called green ash borer. It bores into the ash trees, this wonderfully beautiful metallic green bug, but it's devastating to the ash tree too. So there's two problems: is the spread of the ash dieback fungus, and also now this infiltration of this green ash borer bug, you know. So yeah, the ash tree, or the tree of the world tree, or the tree of divine kingship, or the sacred tree that holds the center of the land and the marriage between the goddess of sovereignty and her consort, is being hammered really hard, giving people thoughts of Ragnarok and the end times and so on. Now we're going to move on from that, but there is another bit of end time stuff relating to the ash tree and its medicine. Now, the medicine of the ash tree is quite wonderful. You can get medicine from its bark, from its leaves, and from its seeds. Now, in the middle of this picture, it's seeds. We call them keys, like a key for unlocking a door. We call them ash keys, but they're the seeds. They're a bit like sycamore seeds that float down like a propeller, but instead of having two blades, it's just one blade, but it still spins its way down to land in the ground. Now, the seeds are edible, and they're really important, and I'll come to that. But the bark is astringent, the leaves are a laxative, and the keys are warming and tonifying, which means they balance out the entirety of the body. Chinese medicine would say the qi, you know, the qi is balanced, tonified by these ash keys. Now, if you think of ash at spring equinox, balance between fire and water, it's really interesting that its seeds do this balancing thing of the body as well. So a drinking tea made of the bark and leaf, it's diuretic, helps to release water retention, which facilitates weight loss. It's antioxidant. What's that say? It prevents or delays all damage to the cells in the body, you know, the antioxidant of it. It's anti-inflammatory. And as a bitter tonic, you know, it's not something you would drink all of the time, but just as an occasional tonic. It's good for fever, it's good for gout, it's good for bladder problems, good for rheumatism, and because of the laxative leaves, it's good for constipation as well. Now then, the important medicine bit really is the keys, you know, these little seeds, and they can be eaten raw. I didn't know that. I've never eaten one. I'm going to this year. We've got some ash trees growing here on the farm, so I'm going to experiment. You can pickle them as well, and some people even ferment them like sauerkraut, you know, so they can be preserved as pickle or fermented, and you can eat them when they're ripe before they go brown in the autumn. They're warming and tonifying. They benefit the liver. They warm and strengthen the kidneys, and they're said to be an aphrodisiac. Now, here's a really important thing about them, and this kind of put a shiver down my back a little bit, because they're proven to increase men's fertility. It increases the semen levels. It wasn't until today that I was reading about that I read about something that's called spermageddon, you know, and since the 1970s, they've been measuring infertility in men, and the sperm count is going down and down and down, and they're calling it spermageddon, you know, and they reckon that it's something like it's over 50% of men have low sperm count now, and some just not at all. And there's even generations of babies being born by IVF becoming adults and having IVF babies. That's how bad things are getting with male infertility. Now then, so with spermageddon, one of the things that could really help it is the ash keys, because they increase male fertility and men's semen, you know. But you've got the ash trees facing Ragnarok and Armageddon. And so humanity, when it needs this fertility thing, is going to lose that with the ash trees as well. You know, that's like a double Armageddon, if you like, Armageddon for the ash trees and human beings' reproduction. I don't know how much is fear mongering, but some websites were actually pointing at 2050, 2060 as an end time for natural production of sperm. I don't know if that's true. But what I'm getting from this is this kind of, there's obviously an end time energy with it, you know, and it's the young male king would be consort of the goddess of nature, that tree is being threatened. And in the human race itself, male fertility is diminishing as well, you know, so it's really interesting. I am an optimist. I do believe that with end times there's new beginnings, and I'm sure that humanity is quite genius with science and medicine and everything, but it's singing a song that I think we need to pay attention to, you know, and it's about maybe the correct management of nature, working with nature, not cross-contaminating it, you know, like the ash dieback came from Asia, just it needn't have, you know, some countries like Australia are quite strict about what plant life they let into their country because they don't want to interfere with the natural ecosystem. And I don't know enough about it, but a quick glimpse, there's lots of ideas about why male fertility is decreasing. It's, you know, estrogen in the water, it's plastics, it's perfumes, there's all sorts of different things that could be there. Or is it just Mother Nature controlling the population? Could be any of those things, you know. But I think with the age of Aquarius and the coming of Bridie, it is a return of a divine feminine, and a good riddance to patriarchy. But we do need yin and yang. The goddess needs her consort. So somehow there has to be that balance of everything. Anyway, enough of that. I'm not qualified to talk about any of that. It's just things I found out today. Ragnarok and Spermageddon. So, nice little picture. I am going to experiment with the keys this year. Get the fertility seeds whilst you can. Boost your testosterone, blokes. The fungus I've chosen, I couldn't find a specific symbiont fungus for the ash tree, but a mushroom that does appear on ash trees, although it will grow on many trees. It quite likes oak and cherry and beech, I think, but it grows on the ash tree, so it's a good chance to look at it. And it's the chicken of the woods mushroom. And I've never tasted it. I'd love to. If I can find some, I will. Apparently, you can find it from spring right through to autumn. On the Facebook group, I'm going to share some YouTube videos about it, how to find it, identify it, and cook it. Apparently, it tastes like chicken, hence its name, chicken of the woods and stuff. But medicinally, then, I'll do my glasses. The benefits given by chicken of the woods, apart from just tasting really good, apparently it really is a really good mimic of chicken, especially when it's fried. It's high in antioxidants. It's antibacterial, especially for things like candida, you know, the yeast infection candida. It's anti-inflammatory. It's anti-carcinogenic, so it helps against cancer. And similar to the ash tree, it balances things. So it balances the hormones, especially after radiation therapy. It helps balance out the hormones of the body, and it balances out sugar levels. So that's great for type 2 diabetes and stuff. And it's interesting, this balancing thing. One warning with it, it will grow on a few different types of trees, and it's perfectly safe to eat with one exception. And you must never eat it growing from a yew tree. You know, the yew tree is toxic, and chicken of the woods growing on a yew tree is not going to be good for you. It's poisonous. So it's about the tree it grows on. So just avoid it growing on a yew tree. That's quite an interesting insight, I think, then, because if it will absorb certain qualities of the yew tree, then chicken of the woods growing on an ash tree is going to have some ash qualities, and chicken of the woods growing on an oak tree is going to have some oak qualities. So it's a thing in itself, but it is influenced by the tree that it's growing on. So just as much, don't have it from a yew tree, but chicken of the woods from an oak, would it be the same as chicken of the woods from an ash, you know, with their different medicines? That's quite an interesting idea that some funguses and mushrooms will grow on all different types of trees, but they must somehow take on something of that tree, some sort of essence of that tree. Now, just to finish off, and I don't know why I did it really, it was a bit silly, but I chose 5 flowers. And the reason for that, although it's a bit silly to try and cram it all in, I think we were going to end up talking about ash tree anyway, more than anything. But going back to the medicine wheel and the goddess Ceridwen, gathering herbs and flowers for her cauldron, according to the story in the Haines Taliesin, which is in the Mabinogion, she gathered charm-bearing herbs and flowers every day, according to the books of astrologers. So, you know, simplistically, even if you have 1 flower a day, that's 366 flowers to do a whole year in a day that she was gathering. And of course, with this Zoom session, we can't do a flower a day. So that's partly why I thought, well, you know, at the beginning of the year, there's no flowers at all. So we just did Snowdrop. It's the first one to appear, and then the primrose or whatever, you know, but suddenly it's just going to come rushing in now. There's got flowers everywhere. So I chose 5 wild flowers that relate to this time of year. They're in bloom right now or around the spring equinox. So they are like Ceridwen, they're the flowers of this moment in time, but it's only 5 of them. You know, it would be a mammoth task to look at 366 flowers, one a day, you know, but that kind of suggests what the Mabinogion story is saying, is that wealth of knowledge of herbalism that I would say we lost during the witchcraft trials when midwives and herbalists were killed, you know. And then people like Nicholas Culpeper are doing a salvage job, writing their books afterwards, you know, but so much was lost. So anyway, enough of that as well. It's all a bit gloomy. The 5 flowers I chose for this time of year are daisies, most common wildflower. Now, daisies, all of these flowers, most of these flowers are edible. They're bitter, so we don't eat them, but they're there. You can forage them. So the flower heads, they're a great wound healer, internal wounds and external wounds, especially after surgery. You can actually mush the flower heads up like a poultice and put them on the wound on the body to improve the healing. They're anti-inflammatory. They help the liver and the gallbladder. And as a tea, just drinking the flower heads like you would chamomile, packed high in vitamins and a good general tonic for the body. You know, it's going to cleanse the liver. And that's just your common daisy, which, you know, we just walk on it and make daisy chains when we're lazy in the summer, and that's about it. Dandelion, the most common weed that people destroy with chemical weed killers, you know. It's a power food. It's bitter to taste, but most medicine is bitter. Dandelion's right up there. And before World War I, it was sold, the roots, dandelion root, was sold in greengrocers. People used to make a kind of coffee out of it. You know, somehow when I grew up, we just called it piss a bed, told if you picked it, you'd wet yourself and things like this, and people just pour chemicals on it. But the dandelion is antioxidant. It boosts the immune system. It detoxes the liver and the gallbladder, and it boosts kidney function. So, you know, the young leaves, bung them in your salad bowl. It's going to be really good for your kidneys, your chi, and your energy. The next wildflower is the Marsh Marigold. Not edible, but it's been used for pain and cramps. It's been used to help women with menstruation problems, I think pain management mainly, and it helps with jaundice and liver disorders. Just another one of the wild flowers Ceridwen could have been gathering this time of year. Wood anemone, beautiful little wildflower, quite befitting the end of the days of willow, because it likes the marsh, it likes the water's edge, you know. So with the alder tree and the willow tree, the marsh marigolds and the wood anemone, they're all kind of clumpy together as kind of riverside area plants. So the wood anemone helps with stomach pains, gout, whooping cough, and asthma. And the last one I chose is Coltsfoot. Often you know, kind of at a glance looks like dandelion, but it's not. Its leaves are very, very different shaped to a dandelion leaf. You know, the dandelion leaf's very jagged. I don't know if you know this. If you look at where are they? If you look at the dandelion leaves here, they're spiky. And the name, I actually thought years ago that it was dandy. And I used to think of like a lion with fancy clothing on, like the dandy lion, but it actually comes from French. And, you know, like we say, dentures for teeth, the French for teeth is dent, D-E-N-T, dent, dentures. And it's dent de lion, which means teeth of the lion. So these look like lion's teeth, the spikes on the leaves. So that's how it got its name, dandelion. It's an English corruption of Don de Leon, teeth of the lion. Really interesting. The lion is Leo the lion, governed by the sun. And Nicholas Culpeper, says that the ash tree is governed by the sun, which is interesting as it observes the sun's rising at spring equinox. Anyway, Coltsfoot is good for sore throats, dry coughs, breathing difficulties, helps people with bronchitis, lung cancer, emphysema, wheezing, and asthma. So there you go. That was just a quick glimpse at 5 types of wildflower that relate to now. They're in bloom right now, or between now and the spring equinox in the days of ash. Once we're into spring equinox, there's hundreds of flowers all over the place. We couldn't possibly do them justice. I'll just go back to picking one to look at, like maybe the bluebell or something, Anyway, that's my presentation for the ash tree. So you can put your microphones on and we'll talk about some of those ideas. I'll keep it recording until we do the meditation.
In Carbondale, which is a town I live near, Colorado, every April, or it's gotten later and later, but we have a little local holiday called Dandelion Day. And there's been a movement here for a long time to, not kill dandelions, and, the town doesn't spray pesticides, and Dandelion Day is just a really fun little local holiday that honors the flower and honors regenerative farming and all of that stuff. So
it's strange how we go from medicinal plants that we then just kill with pesticides and weed killers, and of course that just finds its way into the soil and destroys the soil's fertility as well. One of the theories of the male infertility things is that, all of the pharmaceutical medicines that people ingest get peed out or pooed out, and they find their way into the sewers, and it finds its way into the sea. And at a microscopic level, there's all of these things in the tap water that are just mucking us around. We're putting the weed killers into ourselves with all of the big pharmacy stuff. I don't know how much of a conspiracy.
Never mind the DDT.
Yeah. Many of them are estrogen mimicking. So that's why the masculine situation is worse, because they're being feminized really by these pharmaceuticals, the glyphosates and the antibiotics and many things.
Yeah.
Fracking for natural gas and oil is also damaging to it's damaging to the endocrine system. There's a scientist out here who recently passed away, but she's done a lot of studies on that, and the fracking chemicals are just really, really bad.
What I've been doing with dandelions for a few years now is I take them out at various times of the year, because they do take over my yard once you let them blow. Once a child blows the dandelion fuzz around, which is fun, but you can keep them going, and they don't need any help at all. They're like a beautiful drought-tolerant medicine that loves the hard, compacted soils of my native clay soil here in California. So I, with permission, I dig the whole plant out and I dry the roots, and then I use them, or I grate them fresh into my kombuchas, and then the leaves are really great as tea. And as you said, you can eat them in spring. They're not as bitter. And then the flowers themselves, you can tincture or make wine with them. So every part of the dandelion is amazingly healthy. It's all about, as you say, the liver and tonic, spring tonic.
It's strange, isn't it? People put all sorts of chemicals on their skin to try and have a nice skin complexion. And actually, if you cleanse your liver and tonic, you'll have a good skin complexion. So it's about what you consume rather than what you plaster on your face. The skin's almost telling you the state of the body inside.
There's another fungus, Yuri, that grows on the ash. It grows on the dead wood of ash. It's called, I know it as Alfred's cakes, because when I lived in the woods for a few years, particularly, we used to use they're like black little. They can grow quite big actually, but they keep fire. You can use them to transport fire, and they're like natural firelighters. I just think that's interesting in relation to the ash, that connection.
What are they called?
Yeah.
What's it
Well,
called?
I know them as Alfred's cakes. Alfred's cakes, because of King Alfred burnt his cakes, didn't
he? And keeping an ember burning in it.
There's a suggestion that in Neolithic. Yeah, but there's a suggestion. Well, the inference is Neolithic man, ancient man, and women would transport their fire. You can carry one of those across the land for miles and miles and keep fire, just like a charcoal, almost like a charcoal. They grow on the dying ash wood, only ash, as far as I'm aware. Anyway, yeah.
What do people?
Great information.
Yeah. Well, I'm very cautious. I don't want to create dogma, So when I say with the ash tree, I see it as Lu and young hero gods. I'm perfectly comfortable if people want to disagree and say, well, actually, no, I see it as a goddess and blah, blah, blah. So how do other people see ash in relation to a god or goddess? No.
Well, I'll be honest and say very much as you see it. I mean, yeah, what you speak accords with my own kind of gleanings over decades, over the last few decades. I mean, yeah, Lu and the spear, and I knew about Spermageddon, but when you tie it in with the Keith, I do feel that the dying of the ash and we live in this multitudinous whole, and the ash, the suffering of the ash is a reflection of where we are heading as well. And yeah, it feels right. I can only say that I'm in accord. I'm in harmony with.
Yeah.
I'd pick a hole in it if I could find one.
Well, the summation is very depressing.
Yeah, I'm just talking about a general kind of feeling. Then, so for the last 20 years or so, I lived in Glastonbury mostly, and Glastonbury is unique as towns go, that it's very big with the goddess movement. There's a goddess temple, and every year there's a goddess conference. And it came about, I think, at the beginning of the 1990s or maybe the late 1980s. But it was an understandable shift of people looking for the divine feminine and being quite fed up with 2000 years of patriarchy, So it was very much kind of goddess, and get away with the patriarchy. But things have shifted in the last few years, that although there was a kind of push of patriarchy aside, you're just left with a feminine. And what shifted in the last few years is interest into the alchemical marriage of the goddess and her consort, the yin and the yang together. So when you push patriarchy away, you don't necessarily want to lose all of the pantheons where you've got families of gods and goddesses, where there's relationships between gods and goddesses. So for the Celts of Ireland, they had the Duatha de Danann, the tribe of the goddess Danu, and the Wales had the same. It had the children of Don, which are the gods and goddesses under the mother goddess Don. So you are a matriarchal goddess culture, but you've a family of gods and goddesses and all of their relationships. So that that's been the shift that I've kind of seen happening in Glastonbury. And I'm wondering then, with the ash tree going and the decline in male infertility, is it resonant with the push of patriarchy away, but somehow you want to keep the alchemical marriage of yin and yang, and god and goddess, lord and lady, or everything's just shifting with gender fluidity anyway now, you know? The young generation even think in terms of men and women anymore, you know, that love is love, whoever you're with, you know. I don't know. But it's only questioning what's the meaning of the loss of male fertility, you know. Don't know.
But the ash is equates with the equinox, which is about balance.
Yes.
I mean, any pantheon which is too skewed towards the patriarchy, or its opposite, is missing out on something. A healthy balance is what the wheel of the year points towards, for me. And therefore, and we're just coming through. We're coming through Bridget's time. We're honouring in full the wonder and beauty of the triple goddess Bridget. Why not have a Lou figure symbolising the best of divine masculine?
I'd go for that.
He's the potential
Was
of,
like Lou.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm more into the goddess tradition. I'm finding my own balance, but like everybody else. But there's always, I don't know a lot about Lou, but there's I've always sort of been drawn to Lou. I kind of.
Going to explore it over the months ahead, because in Gaul he's the Celtic Mercury known as Lugus, 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 and Lu seems to be a Proto-Indo-European word for light, you know, a bit like a loose lux, shining light. You know, it's similar to radiant brow then. And another thing, just in passing, is in Irish mythology there's a hero warrior called Cuchulainn or Cuchulainn, and he's thought to be the son of Lu. Now, Cuchulainn goes to the Isle of Skye to learn how to be a warrior, learn martial arts from a goddess called Scathach on the Isle of Skye, and he proves himself by doing this athletic feat that nobody else can do, and it's called the salmon's leap. You know? So the son of Lu does this salmon's leap thing to show off his skills and impress the battle goddess, you know. Yeah, it was interesting. In the vein of Boadicea or Boudica as well, you know, he's learning to fight from a lady, you know. It's very different to patriarchy, you know. Right then, it's 8:10. So if you put your microphones off, I'll stop recording and we'll do a meditation to the ash tree.